All right, good afternoon. It is officially 1:01 p.m., so we are going to get some things rolling today. My name is Kate. I am with Costerisan, and I will be helping you guys, with answering some questions and some chats and things like that to keep things rolling through the presentation. As always, this is our third-party Thursday with Maynard, and this is a September edition with AvidXchange. I have Mark and Mandy from Avid online with us today, and Mark will be presenting and Mandy will be helping me as organizing this presentation. Without further ado, Mark, go ahead. I'm going to pass it right off to you and let you get started.
Excellent. Thanks, Kate. I really appreciate it. So before we get started, I just wanted to do a quick introduction. So as Kate mentioned, my name is Mark Voigt. I'm the manager of sales here at AvidXchange. I am actually based in the Minneapolis area, where this morning it was a balmy, like 38 degrees. So we had our first frost on the windshields, which is actually a little early for us even here in Minnesota, but the kids are not as excited about fall as I seem to be, apparently. So they're back at school and had to break out winter jackets, which they weren't 100% thrilled about. So, but I manage a sales team here at AvidXchange that exclusively focuses on bringing in new customers to our platform. And we cover kind of all the entire country here domestically. So we'll have a little bit more information on how you can interact with us later in the presentation, but just in terms of introduction, that's some of my background. I have been in the AP automation sales, software sales space for almost a decade. Not all at AvidXchange, but I do have extensive background in AP automation through my background here. So a little bit of an overview of an agenda of what we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about the future of AP. Of course, given the last 6 to 9 months, things have drastically changed, and we want to give you some insight as to what we're hearing from people as we talk to them about how they're handling COVID, et cetera. So we'll talk a little bit to start with about the future of AP. Then we're going to roll through how AP automation helps and how it can help you plan for the future and things that are unforeseen at this time. And then we'll dive into a little bit closer specifically as to what we at AvidXchange are doing to assist customers through these times. And then, of course, we'll save some time for Q&A at the end. As Kate mentioned, I am going to try to take some pauses as we go through our process today to make sure that we don't have any questions. Our original plan was to have a customer and an existing AvidXchange customer on, but unfortunately they had some family emergencies late yesterday where they had to bow out. So I will do my best to keep this as interactive as possible. And again, if you have any questions at any time, feel free to post those into the chat section. I will have a couple more like poll related things just to get some feedback and to spur some conversation. So we really appreciate jumping in on those as those pop up. So to kick things off, we're going to talk, as I said, a little bit about the future of AP. So, it seems like forever ago where we were all still able to work from the office. I do not. I'm based remotely most of the time anyways. AvidXchange is actually based in Charlotte, North Carolina. But for us, a huge portion of our population for AvidXchange was office driven, as it was for most of you. So I know we've had this big shift from working from the office, and now, of course, working from home, and ultimately we've got people that are working from anywhere. So I've got peers that are working all over the place. They're taking some vacations and they're continuing to work that way. But of course, that shift in the last 9 months, it has really impacted how we think about business. And companies, what we're finding is companies that were really reluctant to have employees work from home are of course now being forced to find ways to adjust to that, and that includes us at AvidXchange. That we've certainly had to look at how we're going to handle that moving forward. So certainly this transition has impacted the whole business, but specifically in finance, where especially in small to mid-sized businesses, there's still a lot of manual processes that remain. So anything from, of course, how invoices are approved, how they're routed around, signing off on those checks, the entering of information, most of that is built around physically being able to be in the office. So of course, there's been a lot of adjustments that have had to happen, and we're certainly having more conversations about the automation process than we were even a year ago, as this project becomes prioritized for a lot of people just out of force because of COVID. So we're now at a point where, depending on where you're at in the country, where some areas of the country we're seeing, a small amount of people being, maybe having the opportunity to return to work. In some cases, companies have fully decided that that's not going to happen for a while. And no matter what, they're still evaluating this AP process and what that means of both short-term and long-term. So the first question that we just wanted to pose to the group is sort of what the state of the state is for you and your company. So, and again, if you can just maybe drop an answer into the chat, and we'll try to summate these for the group. But curious, are you, for your particular company and office, looking forward, you don't expect to return to the office full time. Maybe this has caused a complete shift where you were going in, and that's not going to be the case at all, even once COVID settles down. The second option might be, hey, I'm definitely going to be back in the office, but we don't expect it, until sometime next year into 2021. Maybe it's, I'm expected back here before the end of the year, or maybe it's, hey, we're in a situation where because of what we do, I never really transitioned out of the office. So I'm still, have always, even since the start of COVID, been working through the office. So just a kind of a quick poll, if people would mind just dropping some answers into the chat, that would be great. I'll give you a minute or two here to respond. So feel free to, we're gonna, we see kind of a mix of things, so which is to be expected depending on where you're at in the country of, the return to office. So just kind of keep that in your head as we sort of frame the rest of the conversation. And again, feel free to give some color in the chat as we continue on of just what you're facing and maybe how you all are handling some of these topics would be great. So just keep that in your, feel free to keep that information coming in the chat. So as we think about that transition back to the office, whenever that's going to be, if it's you're there already, or you're hopefully headed back early next year, and every company is handling that in a different way. We're starting to see a number of things that are making that more and more difficult as we transition to working from home, and then now again thinking try to come back to the office. So one of those that we run into that as we're talking to customers, surprisingly in this small to mid-sized business space, almost 80% of businesses in that space are still relying upon paper checks as a method to issue payments to their vendors. So both from just a process standpoint, where you're actually having to print off or actually physically sign checks, but also just from a security standpoint, where this is becoming harder and harder for companies. That we're seeing more and more conversation about how can we transition this to a more digital form of payment, whether that's ACH or a credit card style payment. So this has made conversations with companies like AvidXchange more frequent, and people that were again hesitant, depending on their industry, to think about how to differently handle those payments are now transitioning more and more. But currently, again, there's still a huge volume of people, and that's really caused some pain in trying to transition back, or transition away from being an office-centered company. So another reason that's made this difficult is we still see a lot of companies that are heavily tied to paper. And again, as you can imagine, and as I'm sure you're experiencing, this remote work environment can be brutal, and you'll start to see those invoices pile up. In many cases, as we're talking to customers, they're coming in on a really infrequent basis to the office. Maybe it's once a week, maybe it's even less than that. And so it's made it difficult to stay on top of those invoices. And to be frank, even in the pre-COVID environment, we hear constantly about people just being buried in that paper. And then, of course, the impact that has on process. So meaning the time it takes to route a specific invoice for approval when it's manual, and not knowing where that invoice is sitting, whose desk is it on, et cetera. And so chasing down invoices, losing invoices, and the impact that can have And then ultimately the storage of those paper invoices where, I've physically been into customers' offices where you have file cabinet upon file cabinet of invoices. And then, what if somebody calls and wants to know, a vendor calls and wants to know the status of that and they have to flip through, or during an audit process, et cetera, just the impact that ultimately has and the amount of paper that we're working through are a complete headache. So both of those pieces are two key things that when we talk to people about automation during the COVID environment and even pre-COVID, that they're considering and that are making it very painful as they've transitioned away from an office-based environment.
So I do want to, it looks like we did get a couple of quick responses as far as what the plans are for, working from home. It looks like Rhonda had said that they're working from home as now, but there isn't a return to office date set. And Dana said something quite similar that, they are 100% working from home or telecommuting. That started in March. And yeah, in Michigan, we have our policies keep having to evolve in regards to mandates set by our government. So yeah, that's definitely something I think we're all facing. So wonderful. It does look like our polls will probably pop in here shortly, just a heads up.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So yeah, thank you for that. So I think what that represents is just still that level of uncertainty, right? And that echoes, the responses that you're giving certainly echo that of what we're hearing from people as well. Of we don't know what this is going to look like, both personally, right? As we, if you have kids or anything, it seems to be different every day as what we're going to do with schools, and that obviously trickles over the professional environment as well. So as we talk to businesses, they're trying to be as best prepared as possible for whatever that might be. If it's long-term, we're still going to be working from home, then we need to have the processes in place that are going to allow us to still function and do business as best we can. And even if we are going to transition back into an office environment, we need to be prepared in case something like this happens again and that we're not caught off guard like a majority of industries were when this happened back in March. So these are what I put up on the screen here is ultimately reasons why people reach out to us. And of course, the COVID component is sort of its own separate piece, but these are secondary, I think, to things that we hear frequently when we have that first conversation with companies about why are we having this discussion? Why are we here today? And so I won't read all of these, but just some highlights is, when we've got a manual process and you're a company that's in high growth, that we want to leverage technology instead of adding additional headcount. And so that's certainly something that we hear frequently. Data access is a huge one that's coming up that we'll talk about, and that this concept of an intelligent enterprise where I want to start to make decisions about my business leveraging data, and when I have a manual process around my accounts payable, that heavily limits what I'm able to do in terms of decision making and data access. Security is a huge one, and what we talked a little bit about it, and we'll elaborate a little bit more, but again, the gaps in this process when it's manual are tremendous. And so tightening that up with an audit trail of sorts when we move to a digital format is key and intensive. You're seeing several comments on here just about what we do in terms of efficiency when we automate, the time savings and administrative costs and what that can do. We'll certainly talk a little bit more about that as well as when we roll into the next steps. But just wanted to highlight a couple of the key things that we hear about from people of why they ultimately take that leap. We know it can be a big change management process for organizations, but ultimately these are the things that push people over the edge in some cases to want to take that leap to automate. So I do have this poll question, and I guess, Kate, were you saying we do have the ability now to take the poll, or do we still need people to use it?
Yes, we can. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that up real quick for everyone to see. So there we go. That should be in everyone's. There we go.
Awesome. So what we're looking for is what pain points do you need to solve for? And maybe there's a couple, but we're just looking to spur that conversation. There's 5 there that you can choose from inside the poll. So I'll just kind of quick read those off while people are entering answers. But is it efficiency, where we need to reduce that processing time because we're very manual and streamline the approval process? It's greater insights. Maybe it is that security component that we're concerned about, or I have such, from a finance perspective and leadership perspective, you don't have that real-time insight and control. Is it strictly a cost perspective? So needing to reduce those processing costs, as we talked about, maybe in growth mode without adding staff, or maybe you're an organization that is cutting back in terms of some headcount and need to look at how we can automate some of those. Again, the fraud component is here, and then just organizational changes. Is it strictly because maybe it is the COVID driven, where we've got to have some processes in place that allow you to work from anywhere. So Kate, do you have the poll results, or is that something I should be able to see?
I do. Okay. It looks like about 80% are going with the efficiency and 20% are going with fraud. So I'm going to go ahead and close that right now.
No, so that gives us some good insight. The efficiency thing is typically the top one that we hear, depending on the organization. So we appreciate that feedback, and that's certainly something that, as we talk through, we'll address further here with the next pieces. So what we want to move into next is just eight best practices as you plan for the AP of the future. And so we're going to look at a number of different areas. We've already talked about the impact of automating your AP. And so there's several others that we're going to kind of roll through here, including reducing labor, that fraud mitigation, elimination of paper, the reporting tools and what that offers you, insight into workflow, supplier management, and then ultimately, again, some cost savings component as well. Okay, so this first piece we talked about is reducing manual labor. So I'd love to ask people just to think about the efforts of what you're going through today, especially as you've transitioned to being at home, and the number of touches that go into each part of your process. So part of what we work through in our initial conversations with customers is really thinking through the pain of what you're doing today, right? So how many, what's the cost of each invoice when you think about how many people have to touch it, and what you're using to complete even just the basic portion of the approvals. So a quick share of a customer that we were speaking to out of California earlier this year in May, that they started to have to, because they were used to just being in the office and going through approvals, because things were so tight in California, they were FedExing invoices around to each other to get approval. So as you can imagine, the cost of that is tremendous, right? So just something that they had to adapt to because they weren't ready for a digitalized approval process. So a tremendous amount of manual labor. So again, we're talking, in many cases, we're talking to companies that are paying highly skilled individuals like you all to open envelopes, chase down those approvals, manually key in all of that invoice information into an ERP, chase down those signers, for checks, et cetera, and then stuffing and addressing envelopes to get those out for payments. And really both from a job satisfaction perspective, as well as just really leveraging the power of why you were hired, this ultimately doesn't make sense. So we're looking to reduce that manual labor component through automation and give people like you all with, to do the job that you were hired to do, which is to focus on strategy and have a broader organizational impact. And gives you the opportunity to, rather than focus on the data entry component, focus on things like exception analysis and vendor negotiations. So the next piece is error and fraud, and actually we've seen a significant, as we've talked about with customers, and you start to dig around the internet, you'll see more and more cases of fraud that have popped up within accounts payable. So this includes false vendors that are popping up requesting payment. It includes also just even behind the scenes, when you think about the level of stress that COVID has put on even you as an individual within an organization, and balancing that work from home environment, where you've got, we were just talking before the webinar about balancing, the 10-year-old that's at home and internet bandwidth because they're all working from home, and just those extra stressors. And what we're seeing is that's causing people to maybe not perform at such a high percentage of accuracy, even as you're working from home to review invoices, and those internal controls start to slip when we're in a manual environment. So again, just billions lost every year because of that, even pre-COVID, but it's accelerated when we've stepped away from the office. So certainly the elimination of paper is a huge piece. So we'll talk a little bit about how AvidXchange assists with this in a moment, but I mentioned this a few minutes ago, that those, all sorts of issues in terms of losing invoices and then the impact of that on late payments and what that means. So obviously a few highlights here. We have less and less of that stacks of paper laying around. We don't have to worry about lost invoices and late payments. And of course, ultimately, we've got a situation where we're trying to assist the environment and stop those the paper trails. So this is this is ultimately, I think, a byproduct of AP automation that is very frequently overlooked, and it's that access to real-time data. So it came up as we did the poll here a second ago, that the initial reason for all of you, and really what prompts this, is that increase in efficiency. And while that's certainly a huge component, I think that the piece that our customers will come back to us with is that, yes, we absolutely saw an efficiency, but the thing that I didn't think about was all of this access to data. So the impact of that, of having that audit trail that we talked about for every payment sent, and what that means when people have a manual process, you don't have that visibility into vendor information that gives you that, the tools that you need to negotiate. It doesn't give you you don't have that visibility into process today that you can use to change, et cetera. So this is a byproduct that not many people think about. They think strictly about the process. But this is hugely important, and again, as people automate it, strong feedback that we get of that access to data has become extremely powerful for them. Again, a little bit tied to that is, again, just when we have technology tied to this, it really changes everything. So today, in a manual process, you have no audit trail, and it's very difficult to find gaps and analyze those and decide how to improve them. So the way I like to think about this is not every vendor or every invoice in your environment needs the same level of insight or review or approval. And really, until you have that audit trail or have this process automated, it's very difficult to identify those and change the process. So once we've got an automated environment, it makes it much easier to establish those guidelines for best practices and adapt certain invoices so that you can gain more visibility and fix those flaws. So this is where we see teams going from, hey, it takes me a week to get an invoice approved, to in some cases it's down to a matter of hours, because they're able to identify those gaps where their process is. Another area of significant time spent is in dealing with suppliers. So again, think about that instance where you have suppliers reaching out, where's my payment, what's the status of this invoice, etc. And if we can offer those individuals or those vendors a spot to come to that gives them that real-time access to transparency, it gives you significant time back to not have to deal with those calls. So again, just another time-saving component where we're redirecting those suppliers to a spot where they can access that information themselves, as opposed to having to come to your team. And the last one we want to talk about is getting discounts and saving money. So ultimately, as we talked about with the paper process and the manual process, we hear all the time from our customers about what the lost invoices, or because an invoice gets held up in approval, that there is late payments that they're having to make, and so then they're not able to renegotiate for discounted payments, et cetera, because they don't have that data and they don't have the leverage because of the length that it's taking them to pay invoices. So once this is digitized and once your process is automated, again, you have all that visibility. You can speed up payment process, which ultimately hopefully helps you take advantage of some of those early payment discounts, and you can avoid any of those further late fees that we see running into so frequently. So this brings us to what AvidXchange can do for you and how we fit into this process. So I wanted to just start with a little bit of overview of AvidXchange, since some of you may not be familiar with us. So we're actually celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. So we are certainly not new to the game of AP automation and payments, but a couple of quick highlights about AvidXchange. We're right now at about 1,500 employees. Most of those are dedicated in our Charlotte, North Carolina office, but we do have a number of satellite offices around the country. And 400 of those individuals, which obviously is a huge percentage and makes us unique in this area, are exclusively dedicated to our payment onboarding and processing environment, which we'll talk a little bit further about here in a moment, but a huge piece of it. We continue to grow aggressively. Right now, we're handling about 12 million payments annually, and that again continues to grow quickly every quarter. From a supplier perspective, inside our network, we're bringing on almost 1,000 new suppliers each week, which again is a benefit to you as you come on with AvidXchange. I think from an accounting integration perspective, we don't run into many that we don't have some level of integration with, and that has ultimately helped us impact, or as I meant the last bullet there, where we're at almost over 6,000 customers today. So inside the AvidXchange platform, there is two key solutions that we work with our customers to offer. So the first is that if you think about it as the front end of your AP process, that invoice process. And then the second component is helping and assisting with processing payments. So we'll start with that front end of the Avid invoice solution. And so what I've got up on the screen here is usually when I mentioned one of the first conversations we have with customers or prospects is, what is your process today? What does it look like today? And so this is a typical map of what we see as we chat with customers about what their current AP process looks like. And as you can see, there's a lot of steps and a lot of manual components. And my guess would be if we had people go through on the phone today and talk about theirs, within a few steps is going to match very closely to what we've got on the screen today. So what AvidXchange ultimately is able to do once we automate is really trim that down to the coding, the approving, and then selecting which invoices you want to pay. So we're eliminating a significant number of steps here. And as we've got up there, typically what we find is that we're speeding up your process through from beginning to end by almost 2.5 times. So again, significantly faster for you to get things processed and to get money to those suppliers. So on the front end of this, invoices are imported into the AvidXchange solution in 3 ways. So we can set up a digital email inbox where we will reach out to your suppliers during the implementation process and give them the information of where they can submit a digital invoice. So obviously this is the preference. Of course, we do realize that there's still those situations where we're going to have paper. So from a paper side, we can establish a PO box where your vendors are going to have the opportunity to just send those directly to the PO box, and our team will then handle the data capturing. Or you can still maintain that yourselves if you want to get the paper invoices yourselves and scan those. We do have some best-in-class opportunity here is to have AvidXchange completely handle all of those. So again, your team is not touching the paper and doesn't have those security gaps on any point. From there, once it's received and captured, we're leveraging a blend of OCR technology as well as human intervention to get that information into our platform. And then the analyze component is, again, that workflow of work going through for approvals. So what I've got up on the screen now just gives you a quick look inside the platform itself. So what you're seeing here is the pending approval queue, which basically once those invoices are in the platform in any of those formats that we talked about from the last screen, this is that pending approval queue that shows all invoices that are requiring some type of action specific to that user. And so, for me, this is the ones that are in need of approval. So, this could be done by coding or a simple review. So users then have access to all of the pertinent information, a lot of which you're seeing right here, which could be the supplier name, that supplier ID, the invoice date, the due date, et cetera. So this is that quick glance of that high level information and sort of that first stop in most cases from an AP perspective when you come in for the day that you want to take a look at. So as you're seeing right away from this screen that when we have this digitized, we're making that approving process as simple as possible by selecting and clicking approve up here in the top right corner. So rather than chasing that down for manual signatures. So this is as you're sitting as an approver and you want a little more information on what that invoice is, this is that more detailed page. So you're seeing on the right-hand side an actual copy of that invoice, that digitized invoice. And this is ultimately where you can code those invoices as well. So you're seeing some breakdown on the bottom according to your GL structure and accounting. You're seeing that ability to do a distribution if necessary across multiple accounting codes. So that left-hand side of the invoice gives you all of that detailed header information that's been captured. And then again, on that bottom portion here is where all the coding takes place. We do operate and work off of your default GL structure. So whenever we receive an invoice from a specific supplier, 100% of that amount will be pre-populated to a specific accounting code. But you do have that ability again to if need be, to manually grab this and break it out across multiple codes. We do also leverage heavily the use previous functionality, which remembers how an invoice was previously coded. So then on subsequent times as an invoice comes in, the system will remember those distribution lines associated with that particular supplier and supplier account number combination. So in the case where you do have invoices that are repeat, you don't have to code those every time. That information will be available from that used previous. So the second component to our platform is the AvidPay network. So talk a little bit about what this means. So the AvidPay network right now is 680,000 and growing, as I mentioned, every week, suppliers that we're processing invoices and giving payments on every month. So what we're seeing right now is, again, we talked about once we've got people onto the network, we're moving them away from that paper check-based environment. And we currently have a 40% and growing average e-payment adoption. And that e-payment really means that we're leveraging two components. One, in full transparency, MasterCard is a partner of AvidXchanges. So we're leveraging them for something that we call a virtual card payment. And we also have an enhanced ACH service called AvidPay Direct. So both of those in terms of e-payment adoption is something that we're trying to drive heavily. And typically what we find, this 28%, so part of our process that we go through when we're helping you evaluate AvidXchange is taking a look at your existing vendors and seeing what percentage of them are already in our network. And right out of the gate, what we find is that right around that 28% mark are vendors that we're already working with, and we already know their preferred method of payment. So you might be paying them by check today, but we know that their preferred method is actually an ACH or a virtual card, and we can help transition them to that. So this is some insight as to how the Avid network process works. And so what you'll see is that, again, accounting system generates those payments. And that's after, of course, we've gone through that complete process of the invoices working through AvidXchange, and now you've completed that approval and transitioned that information over to your accounting system. So you're still going to generate that accounting, you're going to generate those payments from your accounting system. That payment data is then moved over to our AvidPay platform, and that's where that payment process begins. So one of the things that I think ultimately happens is, in some cases when we're automated, I'll work with finance teams that think they're going to actually have less control in this environment because they like that ability to physically write out each check and they know what's happening. When in fact, you actually have more levels of control, and that's where the AvidPay mentions here that we've got that higher level. Once you flag in the payments that you want to issue out payment, that's when we're going to pull that money from your existing bank account and then issue it out to that vendor based on the method of payment that they're going to want to leverage. I mentioned earlier this 400 person team that we have at AvidXchange, and this is the step where they are inserted. So they're working on your behalf to actually increase that adoption of payments that we're moving away from check and getting to those more, again, digitalized format. So that ultimately is not on you. We have that 400 person team that is going out on your behalf and trying to transition those vendors over to a more electronic form of payment. And then ultimately, once we've done that, then of course that client reconciliation back into AvidPay, where we're communicating also to your ERP. So I want to pause there before we, I guess we have one more thing that we just want to bring up that sort of moves us through the AvidXchange component to this. But we are now off. We have two things that are happening right now, and the timing is a little bit tight, but if you sign up with AvidXchange by September 30th, one of two things. If you just agree, if we've gone through a lot of information today in a fairly short amount of time, and the best way to figure out if we're the right fit and to have us discuss how we can assist is to get into a one-on-one conversation with your team and a member of our sales group to really dive into your process. And so we'll provide the opportunity to get in contact with us. And if you jump on that first call, we're providing a $50 gift card just to dive into that process a little bit more and have a conversation about how AvidXchange can help you and your team. So again, that's just between now and the end of the month. And again, we'll provide information on how to do that. The secondary piece that you're seeing on the right hand of the screen is what we're calling our Boost Your Business program. So what we're providing, again, this is tied to that September 30th date of if you're able to move forward with us by then, is basically you're paying no implementation costs associated to this. Those implementation costs can range anywhere between $3,000 and $10,000 depending on the the scope of the platform that we're putting in place for you. But again, we have the promotion tied to this is no implementation costs. And you also get access as part of this, which normally is not the case. These CPE credit classes, there is normally a charge for that we have, but we're giving you access to classes and again, those CPE credits through our training program, our virtual training program, as part of this promotion as well. If you sign up for and agree to come on with AvidXchange before the end of September. So I want to pause there, and I think before we move to our last poll question for the day, just obviously want to open it up to any comments or questions. Kate or Mandy, has anything come across while we've been going through?
So far, nothing in the questions. I'm checking the chat right now. I don't see anything yet, but as you guys are interested in AvidXchange and more information that they have available, you guys can always reach out to me. I am the client services manager with Maynard, and my email is kwatts@maynorsolutions.com. And you can always, if you have a question, you can reach out to me. You can always go to our website and go to the chat and get some additional information as well. So in that way, we can get you guys connected. So obviously here at Maynard, we've worked with Avid quite a few times. and that's why we're bringing them to you. So Mandy, do you have anything else while we're waiting for questions, and then we can do that last poll?
No, I would say while we're waiting for the questions, I do know there's a couple of common questions, Mark and Kate, that we often get when we talk to our prospects and to audiences. A lot of times, we get questions about printing checks, and do they still have the availability to print checks on their own, or does everything have to go through electronic purposes? So maybe you can touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, great question. So there's always a scenario where, we always talk about somebody walks in the door, right? And they are sort of demanding that payment right now, or you need a one-off. And absolutely, there's the flexibility to allow for that. And so, we walk you through how that happens when we're in the implementation and onboarding process. But yes, we absolutely allow that flexibility. And even in some cases when it's not that sort of what I'll call an emergency check run, but in some cases there's reasons and behind not wanting to run a payment through AvidXchange, and absolutely we have that flexibility. It's not a 100%. We have to bring every payment on board that you're making.
And then I would say the last thing too is maybe about the users and how AvidXchange is set up. A lot of times with other solutions out there, there's a per user cost or a limit to users. Maybe you can just briefly explain how AvidXchange handles that.
Yeah, so AvidXchange is a cloud-based SaaS model, software as a service model. So we are not driven by the number of users. So when you get into the process with us, and if you accept one of those calls, it's something we can certainly dive into a little bit more from how the cost breakdown might work for your company specifically. But basically, rather than charges based on the number of users, we're strictly volume based, tied to the number of invoices that we're processing for you, as well as the number of payments that we're processing for you. So depending on the size of your org, we often see that that's a huge impact, because maybe you have hundreds of individuals that are ultimately going to need to touch approvals at some point, and rather than have a user-based fee, inside AvidXchange, you're unlimited to that. Any other questions that have popped up?
Nope, not yet. Sounds like you're doing a good job answering the ones that they haven't come up with yet.
All right, perfect. So I think the last thing that we had was maybe just one last poll question that I think we're going to launch up, Kate, if we can. And it's really like, what are your next steps from here? And we want to get a grasp of, do you want to see a full demo of AvidXchange? You want to hear some more information just in follow-up that we can provide for you via email, maybe some videos on your own that you can work through, or maybe you're just here to learn, and that's great as well, as there's some good information that we provided and just of things to think about. And maybe organizationally you're not at that point yet where you're ready to make this jump, and you're just sort of in that education mode.
That poll is up, and we're just waiting for some responses for you guys. So give you guys a couple more minutes and let you continue to explain a few things, Mark, and there we go.
Excellent. Well, yeah, just in closing, as you're entering in that last poll question, certainly as Kate mentioned, feel free to reach out directly to her if you have further questions or want to connect with AvidXchange directly about how we can assist with your process. Again, we know these are challenging times, and for better or worse, we're uniquely positioned in chatting with a lot of customers that are working through the same issues that you are today. And so we have a team of extensive background that can provide you that insight as to what other similar companies are doing today and how they're dealing with this process. So we'd be extremely excited to have that opportunity to provide that insight, knowing that this is a very challenging time.
Wonderful. Mandy, do you have anything else for us today?
No, I think that's great. Really appreciate working with you, Kate, and the whole Manor Costerisan team, and look forward to hearing some responses.
Good. Looks like a lot of people are going to learn, which is wonderful. And I know a few others who will probably be reaching out later. So, that way we can go ahead and get you guys connected. As always, feel free to reach out to me and I can go ahead and get you guys set up. And I think we're going to give everybody a little bit of time back, unless, Mark, you have something else.
Nope, I think we're good. Unless if no other questions have funneled in, I think we're good.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for attending another Third Party Thursday with Manor. It does look like we are going to continue these into next year. So, watch your emails in your tech tea emails coming out to see what next year's schedule is going to be as well. And we have some more coming in October as well too. So thank you so much to the AvidXchange team. I look forward to seeing more implementations with our clients. And thank you everyone who joined us today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and you guys have a wonderful Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.